All right, good morning. This is me, Robert Phoenix, and I'm here with another edition of the Astro Weather. Astro Weather. Astro Weather. Boy, the actual physical weather is hot as hell here in Texas. You know, we get to look at Mars and Leo and Venus and Leo. These are all aspects of the sun. And my experience is that when there's prominent Leo in the sky, there's maximum heat in the sky as well. So I think we can attribute some of this intensity to the celestial influences of two planets in the sign of the sun, and theoretically, in Placidus, right, they're within hailing distance of each other. So that means that Venus and Mars are amplified. Right? The idea of the conjunction is the amplification of two heavenly bodies, two celestials that generate combined power. So if you add them up in the sign of Leo, of course, you're going to get theoretically more heat, more manifestation of sun. And maybe the Cancer sun will cool it off a little bit. Maybe. We'll see. We'll definitely see, because the sun, technically speaking, is still behind. Like Venus and Mars are ahead of the sun. So if you got up early in the day, you could actually watch Venus and Mars rise before the sun, which puts us into, guess what? The dog days of summer, because Sirius will also now, Calliope Sirius will also be rising before the sun. So we have the morning star Venus, and we have Sirius, which is another morning star, and then we throw Mars into the mix, and these are very prominent energies. They're the first energies that theoretically reach you during the day. That's how this celestial thing works. So let's get into it. I hope everybody had a good weekend. Weather-wise, it was crazy here. Sunday night, it was just nuts, man. It was just torrid all day, like 102, 103, and like 35, 40% humidity, just really brutal. Without rain, like you get to 40% humidity without rain, that's a pretty high humid rate. And then I remember sitting in the hotel room on Sunday night, and this was in Kerrville, and I could see the clouds, I could see the darkness descend, and then I could see ping pong ball size hail dropping into the swimming pool like bombs. And I'm like, I got to get the hell out of here. I got to move my car, which I did, thankfully, because it was one of those storms where, what is it? Safe Light makes a lot of dough because of the cracked windshields. All right, let's get into the weather for today. Got a really interesting star of the day. Today was one of those days with the star of the day that there was a lot of candidates. Some of the people born today: Brian Wilson, very interesting character; Audie Murphy, Mr. Cowboy, Audie Murphy was used basically to sell the myth of World War II. And when you look at Audie Murphy's record as a soldier, it's almost unbelievable. It's like, how the fuck did this guy do all of this, right? So I think they set him up as being G.I. Joe. That's who Audie Murphy was. He was G.I. Joe. And when he came back from the war, he was very, very useful to the military industrial complex and the weapons manufacturers, Remington, Smith & Wesson, Colt, because Audie Murphy would flip from war movies to Westerns and war movies to Westerns. So they were covering all the bases with Audie Murphy. And today's his birthday. Another interesting person today is Nicole Kidman. It's her birthday. She's very Gemini-like. And then we have the very curious case of Patrice Cullors and from Black Lives Matter and Grace Potter. And I might even take a look at that today. Very unusual that two people who are celebrities are born on the same day and 35 minutes apart, and they couldn't be more different. So that might be cause for a drive-by. All right, let's check out the Astro Weather. See what we got. All right, today's the day. We have Sun Juno conjunction. If you want to start something new, today's a good day to do it. I've talked about this day. We have the support of Saturn in trine, so that's long term. But you want to work on, if you want to start something new, you want the battery of Saturn behind you so you can weather the storm. And that is the Neptune square, because you'll weather the storm with the Neptune square, or you'll face the storm with the Neptune square. And that's like folding the tent with the Neptune square. And the Saturn trine is like, well, hold on, no, we're not going to fold the tent. We're going to keep going here. We're going to see this thing through to fruition. And with Pluto in the inconjunct position, there can also be a type of compulsion to get things done, to make things happen, right? There's people are being driven. It's always struck me that some of the most productive people are people that don't live very long. They die young. And it's almost as if they have some kind of program that they may not even be aware of. One of the instances that I clearly remember as being noteworthy was a guy who was a musician. I believe his non-musician name was Bryn, B-R-Y-N Jones. And he was more commonly known by the name of Muslim Gauze. And he was incredibly prolific. Like, this guy was dropping an album every month, pretty much. And he was very controversial. It wasn't as if he was anti-Israeli or anti-Jew, but he was definitely pro-Palestinian. And a lot of his, almost all of his records contained ethnic rhythms, mostly things like the doumbek and percussion from the Middle East and India, for that matter. And then another person who I think fits the mold is a guy by the name of Pete Namlook, and he again, another guy that would do an album a month, and not just his own material, but other people. And he was incredibly prolific. And I think at one point in time he set a record for the most albums in a year or something like that. Well, Bryn Jones and Pete Namlook, they both died young. And Pete Namlook, who was born in the same year that I was, died, I think, in 2012 of a heart attack. So he's been gone for 10 years now, 11 years. And Bryn Jones died very young. He died in his 30s. So there's something about output and being prolific and feeling, maybe not even consciously, that the clock is ticking, right? Well, today is a day where if you don't have that sort of command control aspect in your biological clock, you may want to start thinking about getting some things accomplished. Because I think that the idea of creating something in the material world is vital. Like, literally, it matters. And I don't think we're going to be able to continue to create in the material world in the same way that we have been since, say, 1900, just to put a cap on it. I mean, anything could change that dynamic, from the tools that we use to the inability to access those tools. So if you've been putting something off, today is a good day to get going and work on a long-term project and to face your excuses. Well, I can't do that now because, well, I just have to get this thing done now. Once I get this thing done, I can begin to, no, this is the day. And even with the moon at 25 Cancer, you know, it's still in a somewhat new phase, not completely new, but it's somewhat in a new phase. We'll have the sun in Cancer in 2 days. Tomorrow it's 29. It is anoretic. You don't really want to start a project on a day where the sun is anoretic. And even at 28, some of the energy is dissipating a bit. But because of the conjunction with Juno, it's like, go for it. And then again, the compulsion with Pluto. And that's really where the conversation started. That's like the in conjunct. It'd be interesting to see where Pluto was in the chart of somebody who was prolific at a young age, and whether or not they actually knew what they were going to do or how their life was going to end. And they had some kind of imperative to create as much as possible. So here we see both Mercury and Mars, and also, well, today here in this part of the world, part of fortune is also in Leo. And remember, this is the amplification. This is the amplification of the actual energy, right? The solar energy. And we talked about that Mars square to Uranus on Sunday night. It's not really going to be banging until closer to the end of the month, but that's a very intense square. So reference Sunday night show if you haven't seen it. We've got Mercury moving away from Saturn in a square. So Mercury, you know, don't be afraid of squares. I think squares are kind of interesting, actually. You know, it's sort of like, okay, pushing through. You know, Mercury squaring Saturn is like, especially in Gemini, it's not like having a machete in the jungle and you're cutting away. You're cutting away, you're cutting away, you're cutting away, you're cutting away, so that the lines of communication can become clearer, so that what you say is what you mean. And today is one of those days. If you're going to say something, mean what you say, right? Mercury's moving away, so we're out of that tight square. But what's going to happen is that it's also going to start to square Neptune here pretty soon. So before it squares Neptune, you definitely want to make decisions. You definitely want to say what you need to say, because when Mercury starts to square Neptune, that messaging becomes diminished a bit. People take things the wrong way, especially when the Mercury's in Gemini. So even if it's uncomfortable, say what you have to say, and deal with kind of building a case if you need to build a case. Even though Mercury in Gemini is really fast, the square with Saturn slows it down. So I actually think that this is kind of a blessing. Now, Mercury is also moving into a tighter sextile with Chiron, so there's some courage there. There's some courage to say what you need to say, right? But say it slowly. Be patient. Be patient. And there's some benefit, I think, to speaking your mind, especially with this sextile with Chiron. And if you wait too long, Mercury's going to square Neptune and your message can be diluted. It feels like in general, with all these, what I would say, positive aspects to Chiron, with the exception of the moon, being able to, I would say, just ultimately face your fear, right? With Chiron and Aries, it's the fear of not getting along. You know, the opposite sign is Libra. And in Libra, you say what you need to say in order to make good, right? It's kind of like go along to get along at times, or, you know, having the social codes for people to accept you. And there's nothing wrong with that. Chiron and Aries is really an opening to challenge that convention. And clearly we can see it in what's happening in the news cycle, right? Like, I'll give you an example. So there's a beef going on with Joe Rogan and Peter Hotez, Dr. Peter Hotez. And it started with RFK Jr. being on Rogan's show, Hotez calling out Joe Rogan, Hotez, who had been a guest on Rogan, who talked about vaccines. And I give Joe Rogan a lot of credit for interviewing that little weasel. And now Hotez has come out and has basically told Spotify to, demonetize the RFK stuff. First of all, he has no right to do that. He has no right whatsoever to do that. And that really didn't work last time, did it? There were people theoretically with more clout than Peter Hotez on the music side of things that wanted Joe Rogan demonetized. And Spotify said, no, Joe Rogan is a fucking cash cow for Spotify. They're not going to do it. So what did Rogan do? He threw down and said, listen, we'll put together a kitty, $100,000 if you'll debate RFK on my show. And apparently other people have added to the kitty. I think it's up to around $500,000 now. And it would be to a charity or a cause of Peter Hotez's choice, whatever that is. And Peter Hotez will not debate RFK. They never will. They never will, because if their position is assailed, they'll never recover from it. And he is one of the high priests of modern science. And you cannot have the takedown of one of the popes of modern science. That's just not going to happen. So to me, this is really Chiron and Aries, right? And if you look at Rogan, he's a Leo. And right now the sun is conjunct Mars is conjunct Joe Rogan's sun. So he's being forceful. He's putting Peter Hotez on blast. And Chiron and Aries is like, stand up. Stand up. The other side, which is Libra, even though there is no clear opposite here, although we will see the South Node going to Libra shortly, he won't do it. He won't sit down and try to balance the scales through a nuanced discussion, i.e. a fair debate about vaccines and COVID in general. So this is a really interesting aspect of what's going on with Chiron right now. And even Mercury sextiling Chiron, it's like playing the devil's advocate, poking. And what's happening is that he doesn't even have to debate. He's being flushed out. He's being smoked out, because this is what happens, right? If you're, let's say, for instance, you're the schoolyard bully, and you can bully anybody on your terms and conditions. But what happens when there's like a new kid that comes to school and says, hey, man, I'm ready to take you on. And here's where I want to meet you. And this is where I want to throw down. All of a sudden, the schoolyard bully isn't so big. They shrink, right? And this is what Hotez is. He's a schoolyard bully. And he's shrinking. And he'll use every excuse in the book. And so we're seeing this, and we're going to see this more and more. We're just going to see people get smoked out. And even though they're not able to defend their position or won't able to defend their position in a debate, by not defending their position, they're already racking up an L. And Peter Hotez is going to be taken a lot less seriously. It'll be like, oh, the guy that dodged the debate with RFK. Then you have Mark Cuban coming into the fray, and Mark Cuban sticking up for Peter Hotez. Oh, don't lower yourself to their standards. Well, why doesn't Mark Cuban come on to Joe Rogan? Mark Cuban lives in Dallas. Peter Hotez teaches at Baylor. It's just a short little ride down to Austin, where Joe Rogan's studio is. They could team up. It could be a wrestling thing. It could be Dr. David Martin and RFK Jr. and Mark Cuban and Peter Hotez. Be like a tag team. They could even like set it up like a ring. That'd be fun, wouldn't it? Seeing Peter Hotez in a spandex leotard. Be awesome. Anyway, that's the irreverence with Mercury and Gemini poking fun at the entire situation. I say overall, this is a very interesting day. Now, there is a rebellious element kind of brewing in the air. We talked about that on Sunday night. I'll address that as the week moves on. But I think you got a pretty good roadmap for today. There you go. Let's talk about the star of the day. A very interesting character. I should come up with star of the day music. Today's star of the day is Errol Flynn. Now, I had a lot of choices today. Today is one of those days where the bag was full. But to me, Errol Flynn is one of the more interesting historical characters because of his presence on the Hollywood screen and what he portrayed himself to be, right? So he was this manly man. He was my father's favorite actor, by the way. And his landmark movies really are Robin Hood, in which he's absolutely great. Olivia de Havilland plays Maid Marian. He's great in Robin Hood. And Captain Blood, where he plays a pirate. And he's played in a couple of pirate, he was in a couple of swashbuckler movies, but those are the two best of his cinematic offerings. Now, what's interesting about Flynn is that people have described him as being a closet Nazi. And there may be some truth to that, actually. I think it's really fascinating when people start throwing that term around. But he's got Saturn and Aries right on his ascendant. So we know that, Aries is connected to the word Aryan. He's got Saturn there. And I also feel like that's his father as well. And I think a lot of what Errol Flynn was trying to do was to break free of the influence of his father, which clearly he does by moving to England and becoming an actor. But everything with Saturn is completely stressed, like Uranus square Saturn. And he has all these Cancerian planets in his chart. The moon, Neptune, they all square Saturn. And you can see that in a lot of ways, he is really a true Gemini because he has Sun in the third house, which is dignity, right? So he has his Sun in a dignified place, so he's really a Gemini. He also has a Pluto conjunction with his Sun. So one of the things that Errol Flynn on the sort of the Hollywood Babylon side, or the dark occult version of Errol Flynn, is that he's bisexual. And a lot of people who think that he was a real man's man, well, he kind of was a man's man. He also screwed a lot of women. He was kind of an early prototype for Hollywood, right? This is the description of people like Marlon Brando. Same deal. And you can see it here. It's all very kind of, switching from both sides of the plate. The other thing with Errol Flynn that is also interesting is that there's rumors that he was a spy. And for me, Gemini is the sign. There are two signs that are associated with spycraft, in my humble opinion. And that's Gemini and Scorpio. Scorpio because they can keep a secret, and Gemini because they can take on other identities. So here we have a Sun-Pluto conjunction, and theoretically, Errol Flynn can do both, right? What's also interesting is his relationship with other well-known people. For instance, he was really good friends with, what's his name, Ian Fleming, the guy who wrote the James Bond novels. And what are they all about? They're all about a spy. They're all about spycraft. He was also friends with L. Ron Hubbard. L. Ron Hubbard, of course, being a Pisces, and we have Mars in Pisces and Errol Flynn's chart. And again, there's very interesting, strange connections with Errol Flynn and the so-called spy industrial complex, Hollywood, secret societies, and the occult. He's a very interesting character. He's incredibly smart. He has Chiron and Aquarius. I guess the same degree I do. So he doesn't fit in really well. But by not fitting in well, he fits in. Like that's how he rolls. What's interesting is Jupiter in the 5th house in Virgo. Yeah, so you would think that his health would be paramount, but it's really not with Jupiter there. If anything, he puts his health at risk, to be honest with you. And that all of that is connected to Neptune, right? The Saturn square to Neptune, and even Uranus, the rebel in the 9th house. And Errol Flynn will do as thou wilt. He's got a Mars sextile to Uranus. He's probably equal friends and enemies to his friends. Like I think with Mars there in the 11th house, he could probably turn on you. He could probably turn on you. And I would say that he would probably have a nasty temper too, with a Mercury Mars square, very nasty temper. Like this is not a guy you'd want to piss off. So he's a very interesting character. And you could clearly see kind of the double life that Errol Flynn led. And really, in some ways, he kind of, I would say maybe he wanted something a little more traditional. But I think he has a chart that's given to some excess. That's my sense here. Definitely given to some excess. And the driver of the excess is going to be Mars. It's definitely going to be Uranus, and it's definitely going to be Pluto. He's a dark character, and he had secrets. And I'm sure if you were able to get him in a semi-sober state, and you could maybe not a semi-sober, you could liquor him up, and I bet you Errol Flynn would spill the beans on a lot of people in Hollywood. He also belonged to another version, and this is all very 11th housey. He belonged to kind of a modern day version of the Hellfire Club, and that was based out of Los Angeles. And who was there? I think Errol Flynn, Aldous Huxley, I think Alfred Hitchcock might have been a part of it. There are all these Brits who were living in LA, and they were in the music of the entertainment world, Hollywood, and they actually, that's what they called themselves, the Hellfire Club. And they were heavy drinkers, they were really debauched, and who knows what else they did. I bet you Errol Flynn, if you could have gotten him aside, could have told you just about anything that was dirty and under wraps. I bet he knew where many of the bodies were buried. So there you go, today's star of the day, the one and only Errol Flynn. I wanted to show you really quickly these two charts. I was looking at them last night, and let me bring this up. Let's see, let's go home. So today is the birthday of Patrisse Cullors. And if you don't know who Patrisse Cullors is, she's the head of Black Lives Matter. Patrisse Cullors, born the 20th of June, 1983, 11:25 a.m. in Van Nuys, California. Van Nuys is not exactly a ghetto, by the way, just saying. So this is her chart. It's a very unusual chart. I think we could make a case as to where all that Black Lives Matter money went. It went to her 4th house, Jupiter and Uranus, right? Uranus is radical and Jupiter is philosophical. And she wound up buying how many houses? I think at least 4. And if you were going to task somebody with being the figurehead of a revolution, this is probably a pretty good chart, actually, with Mercury in Gemini, Sun Mars conjunction, true node in Gemini. She's bisexual, at least according to her. That sort of fits the bill, right? Pluto, Saturn, very intense, very, very intense, you know, using the platform of equality, balance, but also Pluto has to do with other people's money and really dialing into that Pluto in that second house and fueling these activities. Moon in Scorpio, so again, quite intense. Venus in Leo is interesting in the 12th house. So that's hidden connections, occulted connections, the power behind the scene. What degree is that Venus? 14 degrees. That would put Barack Obama's sun in conjunction with her Venus. Okay, so we know that this is her birthday. There's another interesting person born today that has the same, pretty much the same chart. Let me show you. And then you have to ask yourself, well, if two people have the same chart, why don't they show up the same? Well, it's because there's this thing called epigenetics. You have your upbringing, you have your family, you know, there are all these other factors. It's kind of like when you have the same varietal of a grape, let's say it's a Chardonnay grape, and you have different lots of that grape being grown in different parts or of the vineyard, right? One, the very same grape will have a different taste because in another part of the vineyard, the terrain is different, the shade is different. Sometimes water levels are different. And so that's what they'll do in certain vineyards. So they'll plant Chardonnay grapes in all these different parts of the vineyard, and then they'll taste them. And then which one is the one that's most representative of the flavor that we're looking for? And sometimes they'll blend them together, right? But just because they're the same grape, if they're grown in different parts of the vineyard, they won't taste the same. And to me, that's a really good explanation of two people being born on the same day. So who am I talking about here? I'm talking about Grace Potter. And Grace Potter is a musician. And a little bit different in terms of the chart. Here, the moon is closer to Pluto. It doesn't have as much distance. And Jupiter and Uranus are clearly in the fourth house and not ingressing. But this is essentially the same chart as Patrice Cullors, essentially, with some differences. And they're very different. They're very, very different. And I'll tell you, my experience of Grace Potter is the first time I saw her perform. This was in Colorado, I think around 2011. And she was amazing. She was fire. She was so intense. And you can see like the channeling of Moon Pluto straight up to Sun Mars. And I don't think I've ever seen a woman rock that hard. And at the same time, kind of not sacrifice her femininity in a lot of ways. Like she was really feminine and super sexual, right? It was kind of like the female version of the male guy who would channel sex as like the lead singer. It's kind of a similar version, but I never once felt like, oh, I'm getting dude energy off of her. Really powerful live performer. I saw her again another time, and she wasn't nearly as good. And I wonder if it's one of these on-off switches, right? With Neptune in opposition, like if she's not feeling it, she's not gonna do well. She's just not gonna do well. But if she is feeling it, boy, look out. And I think the moon is going to be the determining factor here. So emotionally, if she's into it, she's right, she's fire. If she's not, she's not. And she's kind of, she's dealing with trying to stoke the fire or trying to heat the pot, so to speak. All right. Let's talk a little true hemp science, and then let's get out of here for the day because I got to get my other show up and running. And that's 15 Minutes of Flame, which will be on my website at 15 Minutes of Flame. So let's do a little true hemp science. And away we go. We're almost there. Had one of the sleep gummies last night, and boy, nirvana. It was nirvana. I got to bed at about 10 o'clock last night. My life has changed, as some of you know. So my hours have changed, and I have to get up earlier in order to get things done. So the sleep gummy was just an absolute godsend last night. And there's lots of other really wonderful additions to your daily health regimen over here in True Hemp Science. There's oils, edibles, water soluble. There's CBD for your pets. And if you spend $150 or more, $100 or more, I'm up in the ante. $100 more, you get free product, which means you'll get to sample some of what Chris puts together. And in many cases, he'll throw in a couple of sleep gummies or throw in a couple of moon dust gummies. You try those, you're coming back. You're coming back for more. And I also think he puts in some of the smaller vials of, other CBD related products, because he's got a number of them for very different reasons, for very different and specific conditions. So just type in 15-MINS, 15-MINS, and you'll get what you need. You'll get what you need through, the variety of the site, and you'll also get your free product when you spend $100 or more. So 15-MINS, that is your secret code. Please join me at 15 Minutes of Flame, and we'll have plenty to talk about, no doubt. And a lot of the fine people at Chattaria migrate on over. Okay, that's it. Use your head in order to discern what's real, your heart to say what's possible. We've had Peachy here, by the way, the whole time. Hey, Peach Girl. She's on the wing. You just can't see her. She's my wing girl today. So we'll see you back here tomorrow, 8 a.m. Astro Weather. Signing off.